this ace-9 here, again, it's a type of spot where it's okay to check raise. I think a hand like this as a semi-bluff makes a decent hand to check raise as a semi-bluff. You know, has an over and an over to a bunch of pairs like eights and lower. That said, he bets half pot again, and I'm kind of thinking that's better to call and just play my ace high for its value. It does get kind of hard to play on later streets, but you do get to showdown a decent amount, and it does kind of help when you are check calling some hands that are folding to a ton of turns. It does kind of entice when players start seeing you go to showdown with hands like that. It does kind of entice them to start two barreling more, which in general makes you more money on the rest of your range, like your made hand range on that in that situation. So it's not really a terrible thing for that type of hand to go to showdown. So this match we haven't been c-betting a lot, and we're not going to c-bet here on the left. That's a flop where ace jack 6, even if we were in a mindset where we were going to c-bet a lot, that would not be a flop I would c-bet with any two cards anyways. People flat a lot of ace-x type hands, ace-x suited, and a fair amount of ace-x off hands, and actually a lot of jack-x hands too, jack 10, queen jack, king jack, maybe even ace jack. So they definitely hit that flop a lot, and obviously the flush draw adds a few percent of hands that can play back at you, as well as like multiple gut shots on that board. So especially for someone who's fighting a tight range. So the ace 8 here, similar spot to the ace high hands earlier. This time we have a backdoor flush draw, and I think it makes a pretty good spot to go for the check raise. It's probably pretty close to being able to check call, but it might be a little bit too weak because there's the flush draw out there. It just gives it a little less playability on some cards that you might be able to check call with ace high twice on if there wasn't a flush draw out. Okay, so this hand on the right, this is a fairly uninteresting hand in the result, but this is a good spot to talk about checking back ranges when you are trying to balance. Obviously, I'm not trying to in this match, but I remember seeing a thread or something where on Lego where someone was they were in like a river spot where they checked back the flop and they had got led into on the turn and then like overbet the river, or someone like potted the river into them, and it was on a board similar to this where the flush came in on either the turn or the river, I can't remember, and the person was kind of lamenting about how they never show up with a flush in this spot when they check back, and all that, and what were they supposed to do with said bluff catcher. And that kind of raised my interest because I think it's interesting that they mentioned that they never show up with a flush on the river when they check back a flop like this. I think it's definitely a mistake. I think if you are checking back a flop with a flush draw on it with any regularity, like you're doing it more than, I don't know, 10% of the time or something, that you should have some flush draws in your check back range. I mean, I think it's just kind of mandatory that you do. I don't think you really lose any money at all by checking it back. It just gives you a ton of flexibility, and I think the flush draws you should check back are the weakest ones, the ones that hate the most to call a check raise. So with a 10-high flush draw on this board, I'll resume now, but 10-high flush draw on this board, I think is strong enough to bet in those situations. But if you had, a 6-high flush draw, I think it would be a perfect candidate to check behind if you're trying to balance your check back range, because, it kind of sucks to call a big check raise on that board. You're going to get barreled off the turn a ton. You're only going to get to see 4 cards, and you also get overflushed, you know, more than you would with a higher flush draw, obviously. So, a couple interesting hands here. I don't think I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's quite good to check back a flush, and the great thing about it is that no one expects you to check back a flush draw, like ever, at least at mid stakes and small stakes. So, especially versus thinking opponents who are actually trying to hand read you, when you check back a small flush draw on the flop that you check back a ton, and then you hit the flush either on the turn or river, either one, and then you raise them on that card, or whenever you raise, you get so much more action than you would have otherwise. I mean, I've kind of had that in my game for a while, and I can say from experience that people spaz out when you make those type of raises. They pay off super light. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous how bad they play versus it. And yeah, I mean, I just wanted to point that out. There's also a bunch of other stuff you can do, like, you know, raising blank turns when you have a pretty wide check back range that's also, you know, fairly balanced, because you're going to want to raise some turns when you hit, you know, trips or two pair when you check back a pair on the flop, and stuff like that, or you check back a gutter and make a straight on the turn. You know, it makes sense to have a semi-bluff range, and those weak flush draws make pretty good candidates. Since they only have like 18 or 20% equity on the turn, you're not losing a ton when you get 3-bet, and you hardly ever really get 3-bet when the action, I mean, you do sometimes, but very rarely. So all in all, it just makes a really good hand to check back in those type of spots when you're taking that type of strategy. So anyways, that was kind of a long ramble. Sorry about that. But hopefully that was worthwhile for some of you. The jack hand here, fairly standard check back. I could bet it, but it's, again, I'd have to fold to a check raise, and it makes a pretty good bluff catching hand. If I had 5x, I'd be probably much more likely to bet. And we're going to call the turn here, obviously. Same with the 10-4. Actually different with the 10-4. I check back, obviously, but it's more of just kind of a giving up type thing. Although I probably could just bet it, because since I have equity. Yeah, I probably could bet it. Okay, so two interesting river spots here, and kind of different river spots. On the left here with the jack deuce, I think it's a pretty close decision whether to value bet. I think it's a check behind, though. The reason being, there's a few reasons. First, it's kind of hard for us to show up with a hand on the river that we want to bluff with, and you know, this player that I'm playing against, he's definitely good, and he's definitely hand reading me, and he's probably a pretty decent hand reader. So, you know, if I have ace 10 or ace queen that I floated the turn with, I pretty much would not bluff with it. I don't see much point in bluffing with it. It just wins enough at showdown, and you know, you probably are able to fold out a couple better hands, like pocket sixes or something, but it doesn't make up too much of his range. And it's a spot where we can definitely have king x sometimes, like king deuce, king 3, king 4 that we check back. You know, he's already seen us check back bottom pair a couple times, or top pair a couple times. As well as 5x. We can also have 5x a decent amount, and we can also have jack x a decent amount. So our value range, if we bet all those hands, would just be really wide, and it'd be really hard for him to call with worse hands than jack deuce. On top of that, I think it's a pretty good spot for him to check a better jack than we have. So he definitely has better hands in his range, and I also think it's a pretty decent spot to go for a check raise if he has a king. It's a type of spot where, well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say it's a pretty decent spot. It's a spot where some players might go for it. So all in all, I think it's better to check back the jack deuce here. The 10-4, I think it's pretty much just a raise call on the river. He's probably leading most of his strong hands on that turn, just given the nature of how dry the board is, and how weak our flop check back range is. So that said, he probably doesn't have too many better hands on the river that